Welcome back to Talking with Ted. This current series that we are in is Flora for hikers, and some of the flora out there is edible. And so we want to help you to know how to handle that, what to eat, what not to eat. All right, so first we're going to break this up into groups, and we're going to start with red flowers. All right, and there are rules. Let's go over the rules before we do anything else. Rule number 1, never eat a plant unless you are absolutely positive about its identification, okay? You can't be confused. You can't be thinking, well, maybe. You have to be positive. Rule number 2 is to see rule number 1. No, I was just kidding about that. That was pretty funny, huh? Okay. All right, rule number 2 is wild plants vary wildly, get that, in concentration of chemical constituents. Therefore, explore them in limited quantities, sample them, get a taste. Don't just like eat a bunch, okay? And probably because a lot of them are going to taste funny or a little peculiar, or you got to work with them, you're not going to get much of them anyway, and there may not be a bunch of them out there, but it could happen. So go slowly and don't eat too much too soon. All right, now the problem, okay, problem number 1, 4,000 species in Arizona, your chances of misidentifying something are really good, and that's because our books on wild edible plants are not designed to help you figure out what the plant is. Books that are identification guides don't tell you what to do with it, and at least not in detail. They'll give you a little idea, but so you have to use both kinds of books together. All right, that's just the reality, the way that it is, especially in Arizona where there are 4,000 species in the state. So it can be confusing, and I tried that. Take a picture and search on Google for the plant. Forget it with plants. That does not work. Okay, animals, so forth, it's fine, or places, but plants, these superficial characteristics that show up in a picture do not tell you what you need to know to accurately identify it. All right, red flowers. Let's start with that. So, desert red flowers, Ocotillo, and of course we'll have pictures to illustrate, each of these things. So the problem with Ocotillo, even though the books talk about how sweet they are, and they are red tubular flowers, hummingbirds for the nectar, the problem is there is an astringent compound in the flowers. And when you bite the whole flowering group, it just sucks the moisture out of your mouth. And they're edible. I've never considered them to be sweet, especially by 21st century Western culture standards of what sweet is, okay? So I don't consider them very palatable, but they are edible and they're easy to identify. We talked about Ocotillo in the oddball plants video. Number 2 is a plant, another desert plant called tuberosa. All right, now this one, red tubular flowers again, and it does actually taste sweet. Now this is an undershrub. It does not have a lot of stiff stems and structure, so it kind of grows under other things to help it stand up. But the flowers are relatively sweet. They don't have that astringent quality that Ocotillo has. So you won't get a bunch of them, but they are edible and rather tasty. They also flower for a long period of time, like from September through May, so a very long flowering period in the lower or middle Sonoran Desert elevation, 2,000 feet lower, okay? All right, now when we talked about the wildflowers, we mentioned one called paintbrush, all right? Now paintbrush is also red, and it has these tubular flowers, and it looks just like, you would dip a stem into a paint, and then you would have this really bright, cool looking brush, all right? So you can eat the whole head of those flowers. Now, it does taste kind of sweet, and it's a little funky. Sometimes, the herbage that you're eating with this stuff, there could be a bug or something in there, but you just take it in stride, give it a little more crunch to stuff. The issue with paintbrush is that if there is selenium in the soil, how would you know? You won't. It could become toxic because it absorbs the selenium. Just don't eat too much, okay? So that's what I've already said. I think that was rule number 2, okay? So those 3 for red flowers. All right, next. Red fruits. Now these are mountain, higher elevation plants. Gooseberries, and one hike that is specific that I've come across this is the Prescott Circle Trail, all right? So, and it'll have 2 kinds of berries. Ones with spines on them, you're not gonna eat those, okay? But there are some without spines, okay? The shrub may or may not still have prickles on it, but the fruit is just juicy, red, and tasty, and you can just gather it very easily, and no spines on that one, okay? The next one, which is you're gonna be familiar with, is raspberries, all right? Now you've seen raspberries in the store, they grow in the mountains, it's a member of the rose family, and so you can find these in cool, wet places, canyons like West Fork or Escondida in the White Mountains. So those are some specific places where you can gather this fruit. Raspberries, you know what they are, what they look like, and what they taste like. Widespread, higher elevation mountains. Okay, the next one, we have a sample. Rose hips. Okay, so you know what a rose looks like. The Arizona rose, where these grow on after the flowers, of course. So you'll get the pink, very distinguished, recognizable rose, and the fruits come after the flowers, all right? So rose hips look like this. Now my son, I talked about him extensively on our Hiking with Kids video, said that his supplement from the store has rose hips in it. And it's very standard, predictable, normal. I said, it comes out of a bottle, it's not natural. This is off of the plant, okay? Now it might have bruises, it might have blemishes, it might have bugs, but this is the real thing. It's the same high vitamin C, antioxidants, flavonoids, all that stuff, okay? And so you're just gonna eat them and just love it, okay? So they're not juicy or sweet, they just don't taste like much of anything, but they are edible. And if you are a hungry hiker, they're really good to find those, okay? You can find a bunch of them. We found with my son as we harvested some other plants from an abandoned orchard in West Fork, apples, pears, plums, and so forth, and an old broken down swimming pool up against the red cliff as you go in on the trailhead at West Fork, and there were roses all over by this old swimming pool on the hips, bright red, very easy to distinguish. You know what roses look like in the prickles on the branches, but you can pick these easily and get a fair bunch of them. You would probably end up, you could eat them fresh like I just did, or throw them in a crock pot, add them to soup, gives you some color and some nutrition. We like nutrition, okay? All right, so red fruits. Now remember, I offered people to come and pick fruits from my yard. Blackberries. I mentioned this to a person in April. She said, okay, I'll come over. And I looked at her like, what? Okay, they're not ripe in April. Okay, I was just getting people situated on what was available. Okay, they ripen in June, my blackberries. So these rose hips, late summer, some fruits, and mostly these are fruits. Sometimes there are other parts. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there are certain times of year. So you've got to bear in mind that you can't just walk out there anytime and get anything. You can go to the store and get blackberries any time of year. You cannot walk into the landscape and do that, all right? The ones in the store are coming from, you know, Chile or, you know, a whole different hemisphere or something. You don't know. And so it can kind of mislead you into thinking that you can just do that outdoors. Not the case. Now, my favorite book on the edible plants, I'm going to mention a couple of resources as we go along, all All right, so wild edible plants of the western United States, Donald R. Kirk. This is probably my favorite because it's old and it's falling apart. So that's kind of like me. All right, so he says in here, page 4 or 5, people expect there to be things to eat out there and to be able to live off the fat of the land. He says the land is not fat, okay? If you think about the book Into the Wild, which our other friend, Samuel, I think it's Thayer, okay, talks extensively about Chris McCandless, Into the Wild, written by John Krakauer. And he starved to death is what he concludes. He did not get a poisonous plant. He did not get enough to eat. The land is not fat. So you're going to get a few extra things, a few supplements, but you're just not going to go out there and live off the fat of the land, okay, for a variety of reasons, because it's not abundant enough, okay? All right, so that's red fruits from the mountains. Now we're going to go red fruits back down to the desert. All right, so we have a plant called wolfberry. It's a member of the potato, tomato, tobacco family. Small red fruits, like about pea-sized, and they are called tomatillos. All right, so that means a little tomato. So it's in the tomato family, and so that's what they will be like, but they'll be tiny and small, but some shrubs will just have bunches on them. These shrubs have thorns, and so you gotta not just stick your hand in there, you're gonna kind of be gingerly when you approach these things, respectfully. All right, wolfberry. Now there's another one called hackberry. Okay, it's a different family, elm family, and it has thorns too. While the wolfberry is like a tomato-like, not very sweet, the hackberry, the desert hackberry with the same size of fruit, about the size of a pea, is orange, but much sweeter. Both of them have tiny seeds, no issues with eating those. Think of tomatoes. You don't have a problem eating tomato seeds, all right? So wolfberry seeds, same thing. The hackberry seeds are a little crunchy, and the fruit, though, is sweeter, and so you can just munch away on them. There's a shrub east of Sunset Point on Black Mesa there. It's about 8 feet tall 1 year, and again, some years they're covered. This shrub, 8 feet tall, from 30 yards away, it was a mass of orange. Just looked like this orange thing. Well, it was covered in fruit. Some other years, my hackberry, growing in the same landscape, no fruits, hardly ever, and I'm 5 miles away. Why is that? I don't know. Seasons vary, sites vary. You can't always count on the same thing happening the same year for a variety of reasons. Weather, temperature, the plant just needs a break because it had a bumper harvest crop last year, so it's got nothing this year, and you just don't know, okay? So it's important to understand another principle is variety. Okay, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You've got to know about this plant, that plant, the other plant. Many of these plants are available for your landscape. You're not just going to plant one. You're going to plant a variety so that you have options. Okay, it's important. Next, red fruit from the desert. All right, this is desert mistletoe. Tiny red berries. The mountain one with the white berries is not edible. The red one from the desert, it's parasitized. It's parasite. It's mistletoe on mesquite and palo verde and so forth. Tiny berries, and you can grab a whole branch and kind of break off, the fruit so you can collect them easily. Otherwise, when you try to get one, it's just too much effort involved. And a lot of times, these native plants, it's a lot of effort involved. We're going to talk about that in a minute here with oaks, acorns, okay? So you've got to figure out a way to mechanically harvest these things. They're just not going to fall into your grocery bag, okay, like at the store. It's just not going to happen. All right, so mistletoe, dwarf mistletoe from the desert, red berries. And they taste okay, but they're so tiny, you got to get a bunch of them. You're going to have to be pretty hungry to mess with them, but they are there. Okay, edible options, keep them open. Finally, cactus, red fruits in the desert. pincushion cactus has a little fishhook kind of spine on it that's black. These are a cactus called mammillaria, and it's also called strawberry cactus because the fruits taste like strawberries. Tiny little crunchy seeds. The fruits are small, kind of club-shaped, but they're easy to pick. And one thing to bear in mind when you have cactus, and we'll show you in a minute, some fruits have spines. That's a problem. Some fruits do not have spines, and this one has no spines, so it's easy to harvest, easy to eat, and most of these that I am presenting, you can eat them raw, fresh, whatever. Some you can also cook, like the rose hips that I mentioned, and most of these, though, like with the strawberry cactus, just eat it right off the plant. All right, now we're going to go red fruits, chaparral. All right, so this is mid-elevation between the deserts and the higher elevation, and my favorite one is called holly leaf buckthorn. Tiny red fruits, again about pea-shaped. They taste kind of weird. You don't see a lot of this. They're kind of spicy. You don't see a lot of these shrubs all over, but they have a very holly leaf like Christmas. And in the fall, you'll be thinking Christmas, and the fruits are like red berries, and so it's why it's called holly leaf too. So they're easy to pick, easy to harvest. Grapevine Canyon, I'm growing all over the hills. I was at Grasshopper Point and Oak Creek Canyon above Sedona. Shrubs there with plenty of fruits coming in. So oftentimes when you see something, note it where you can go back and harvest it later. And oftentimes there's a lot on a plant at one time. And so again, timing's important, season of use. So obviously right now, those fruits are not ready to pick. So you just note where they're at and you can go back and get them later. Okay, holly leaf buckthorn. Next, along in the chaparral there, off in the same place, is manzanita. What does manzanita mean? Little apple. Okay, so they taste like an apple, but they're about pea size again. The seeds in it are really hard. You're probably going to spit them out, but the fruit has a pleasant, appley, crunchy, a little acidic flavor to it, so they're actually pretty good. So when you can get quite a few on a manzanita, you'll recognize a manzanita with its evergreen, thick, leathery leaves, but the red bark, okay, is what manzanita looks like. Next, our last fruit, red chaparral, is barberry. Okay, this is growing in my yard. It's growing all over around Cortez Junction. It goes in Texas. It's very widespread. There they call it algerita. The leaves, unfortunately, are very spiny. You stick your hand in there and it's not going to feel good. Sometimes I'll wear, latex exam gloves just so I can take some of the edge off all those pokes from the needles. But lots of fruit. I harvested a ton of that this year. The shrub will be covered in yellow flowers first, okay? Sometimes, and I eat these cooked with the prickly pear, and if you look at the cactus video, you'll see that, where I'll have the fruit in the bottom, so they're being cooked. So if there should happen to be, and I have them frozen, and I store them in a freezer, so if there's a bug in there, and you look at some of these fruits and there'll be a hole, well, there could be a weevil in there. And so if you freeze them, the weevil's gonna be dead shortly, but also when you cook it, it's gonna boil for a while and it's gonna kill any possible germs associated with it. So that's something to keep in mind, though you can eat it fresh, bugs and all. It's kind of sweet tasting. All right, now we're gonna move to flowers that are purplish or pinkish. Now we have a thing called Covena grass, which grows in the desert all the way up to the pinyon pine, and it's a member of the lily family. Purplish flowers, you could just eat those and just eat the flowers. Crunch them right there. I think I illustrated that in a previous video. Okay, so the bulb that's about 6 inches down in the ground, you can eat that also, and it tastes the same. If you've ever been to Hawaii and tasted poi, which tastes like nothing, that's what they taste like. I rarely eat the bulbs though, because by the time you dig around in there with all the rocks and everything, the stem breaks off, you can't find the bulb, the plant's dead, and you wasted your time. So just eat the flowers. It's easy. Bite. Okay? Covena grass. Next. Covena neo-mexicana, New Mexican locust, all right? And it's got a very pea-shaped group of flowers, pine forest, pea family, and prickles all over the stem. So you gotta be careful. The flowers, you get a bunch of them there, and just eat the things. They do taste sweet, all right? Purplish, pinkish, and they grow in clusters. A lot of pea plants, soybeans, peanuts, etc. The fruits are edible. We're going to talk about mesquite in a minute. The fruits are not edible on this, only the flowers, and they taste nice. Okay, pine forest shrub, big divided leaf, New Mexican locust. Next is a plant called oxalis. It has a very acid kind of flavor to it. I eat the flowers or the leaves. I've eaten this on a video here before too, so you can look back over the edible landscaping section where some of these are illustrated also. That grows in the mountains, canyons, moist places, shady. Clover flower leaves, very distinctive, bell-shaped flowers, very cute. And once you see the clover leaves and the bell-shaped flowers, very distinctive. And of course, yeah, I'm sure you could taste it and just see, it doesn't taste like it should. Not, then don't eat it anymore. Spit it out. Okay. All right, fruits purplish. All right, we're coming to the end. Fruits purplish is one called, we had holly leaf buckthorn. There's one called California buckthorn. Okay, and that one has purplish fruits. And you would eat it sparingly because it has a laxative quality to it. Hard seeds, but it's available at places like Grapevine Canyon, shady, big leaves that are simple, and the fruits are pretty extensive on the shrub, but you just have to eat it sparingly. Likewise, in that same kind of place, Grapevine Canyon, are you getting kind of a hint where you would go and actually be experiencing success in finding what you're looking for to supplement your diet? Or if you are want to get familiar with these things, because you don't know what you're going to find where, but you just need over time get familiar, recognize, sample things. Okay, I've eaten this on the videos too. Grapevine Canyon, all right, blueberry elder or elderberry, blue elderberry. Okay, so Sambucus is the genus, and it has big white creamy flowers, big bunches of them, very fragrant, and then big clusters of these tiny purple fruits. Don't eat too much of them. I have been told that they act as a laxative as well. Okay, blackberries will grow in that kind of habitat, like the raspberries, only these are going to be dark and purplish. Oftentimes, the stems and leaves have prickles on them, so be gentle and don't get yourself hurt, tangled up in the briar bush, because that's what they are, rose family. Okay, chokecherry is another plant, member of the rose family, with the same kind of fruits as the California buckthorn. I had this growing in my landscape, and so I was eating it. The chokecherry doesn't sound very tasty, does it? Well, you have to let it ripen and become not reddish, but dark fruits. Okay, so I was harvesting these rather large seeds, so you're getting more seed than fruit, but it's still an option. And I'd spit out the seeds. Well, 2 days later, all of my fruit was gone. I don't know if it's a squirrel, a bird, or whatever, but that happens. But still need to know about it. And if it's late in the season, it's a good option for you. Samuel Thayer talks glowingly about it. All right, another problem with many of these books, they leave out a lot of Southwest stuff, okay? He does not even mention mesquite, all right? And 3 plants that were the most important for keeping indigenous tribes alive for thousands of years: mesquite, prickly pear, and saguaro. Okay, he does not even include mesquite or saguaro. I can understand the saguaro because it's rather limited in distribution, but mesquite, I mean, come on. Anyway, that's just the way it is. Many of these plants, they leave out much of the Southwest. We're not the biggest market for these things. even though we probably have more food than many of these other places that are talked about in the wild. All right, so I'm gonna finish. We're gonna talk about 2 more shrubs, and that is twinberry. All right, Arizona honeysuckle, which grows up on top of Mount Union. It has 2 very funky little purplish fruits, rather sweet tasting. Seeds are not a problem. Red tubular flowers, and high elevation, mixed conifer forest, but it's rather distinctive how you have this red bract and these 2 little purple fruits just stuck there. It's kind of weird looking. You won't forget it once you see it, so we'll have pictures for you. And then another plant called serviceberry, which is another rose family plant, okay? And it's about as close as you're gonna get to blueberries in Arizona. I was on the north side of Granite Mountain, west of Prescott, shrubs everywhere, serviceberry, okay? So, very difficult hiking in there. So you could find these at other places, shady, mixed conifer forest, pine forest, white flowers, and blueberry kind of fruits. Easy to harvest, bunches of them, so very good one to know. All right, finally, for this group, okay, prickly pear. We talked about prickly pear before, all right? So another thing to bear in mind is that you have to have tools and containers when you are going to go out and harvest something. It's not going to happen otherwise, okay? And so when you see the prickly pear here, all right, so you're not going to grab this thing. The fruit on this one, each cluster, can actually grow a whole nother plant, but it's got little tiny spines on it called glaucons. So you don't want to touch it. You can stick your knife in there or peel it off, holding it with these, forceps. But I'll use Vitamix, which I talked about in the cactus video. I throw the entire fruit in the Vitamix. Seeds, spines, skin, everything. And it just decimates it all. It kind of gets to be a little bit of a puree kind of thickness to it. And it is all entirely edible. And with the seeds actually included and so ground up, it's actually more of a protein source than would otherwise be the case if you threw the seeds away. All right, so we're going to talk about pads in the next segment on the edible plants. All right, so we have covered some books, tools you need, season of use, rules, okay, deserts to mountains. Okay, in our next segment, we will talk about some other parts of the plants and where they grow. Okay, and again, places where you can find them. All right, so we'll see you next time.